And I welcome the opportunity. It's my second time today to talk on housing, which is unusual. And part of me said, I don't want to repeat the same thing. But you know, it's extremely important that we continue to counter the narrative from the government. First of all, let me welcome the bill and the effort that's gone into it. It should have happened sooner. And we know that during COVID, when we had a moratorium, it had a hugely positive impact. There was a dramatic decrease in evictions. And after it was lifted, of course, evictions rose sharply again. Since then, the housing crisis has worsened and deepened, notwithstanding the narrative from government. We know now that in August there were 10,805 people homeless, and 3,220 of those are children. Now, those figures are very important to say slowly and out loud, because that is a direct consequence of government policy. So imagine we're here today and you have the help of all the opposition, no pre-legislative scrutiny, which was waived, no analysis from the library, but I do thank them for their bill briefing, which they produced under pressure. And that all of that effort has been made to help the government to bring in a piece of legislation to stop evictions for a certain time, to defer them really, and to introduce them on a phased basis. Why? So that the services, the homeless services, won't be overwhelmed. Now, that's what we've come to in this country. Now, that in itself is worthy of a little silence and reflection, really, when we've come to this point in our lives where we have to bring in legislation to bring in phased evictions, defer them and then bring them in on a phased basis so that the homeless services won't be overwhelmed. And we know officially that 10,815 people, 10,805, I like to be precise with figures because they represent mothers, fathers, children. So a wise government, a wise politician would say, what are we doing? What's happening here despite all the narrative that things are worsening? In Galway City, as I speak, there is not a single home available under any HAP scheme, the regular scheme or the one where discretion is allowed. None. We know that from the Simon community, and I read it out this morning, nothing available. We have a task force, a housing task force, that has been sitting on every now and again. We're waiting for I understand, the minutes from a meeting in February, in a situation where we're at a crisis point in Galway. I checked today, somebody on a waiting list since 2007, never been offered a home, ever in that period of time. This is into our 10th year. There's no need for exaggeration here because the figures are stark. And then we have a city council and the CEO making a presentation, a 2-page presentation, mind you. Now, I always look for brevity. I think brevity adds to your argument. But in this particular case, brevity from a CEO, 2 pages on a city that's going under with a housing crisis. And one thing that jumps out at me is that essential to the delivery of our targets are the private sector in their role in delivery of social and affordable housing through Part 5 and turnkey schemes. And I look at that and they list them, and I welcome that. They're minute. And so we're utterly reliant on the market, even though we have the Taoiseach Minister telling us that no, the state is the biggest agent in it at the moment. There's the CEO. We're reliant on the market in Galway City. And then I mentioned the task force and I mentioned the LDA this morning, which I'll come back to. We have pockets of land in Galway. We've no city architect. We've run down the planning department. I'm not here to demonise any planning department. They work extremely hard. We have absolutely run them down, run them ragged, made them involved in the strategic housing schemes, extra work on them for which they got no recompense in any way, psychological or in terms of money, to help Board Pleanála. We've done away with them now, again on a phased basis. And we have no personnel now within the City Council and no policy to directly build public housing on public land, albeit use the Land Development Agency, use any agency you like, but let the local authority lead with vision from the government. Public housing on public land. Deal with our waiting lists. Look at removing the silly limits. Silly doesn't capture it in relation to income limits. And the constant removal, in my office and my staff, you can't imagine, like all TDs, what we're doing, trying to get somebody back on the list because their income went up a little bit, either with extra payments or extra work for a period of time, and they're taken off. And then we write letters, and it's like a lucky dip. Sometimes we're lucky and we get them back on, and we rejoice. And they end up bringing in a gift to me, which I don't need. Such is their gratitude to TDs. And we're all doing this instead of looking at the bigger problem. And very often when that person is put back on the list, they've lost 2 years. So they might have been on the list since 2007, then they lose 2 years between 19 and 21, and then they're back on again. And we're so delighted. That's what we've been reduced to, because we're utterly failing. And I put myself into that, because despite my best efforts and the opposition, we've utterly failed to get the message across. We're not ideologues on this side of the house. It's practical, it's common sense. You have to have homes for people and security of tenure. And you do that through a myriad of ways, but mostly you do it through public housing on public land. And you balance the market and let the market provide. But we have done the opposite. We have removed the local authority and the government from it by bringing in HAP. Remember that? I hadn't time to quote it this morning, and I don't have it with me, where somebody in the department absolutely rejoiced at the wonder that was HAP. Quote, unquote, it's there amongst my papers. Taking a delight in the progress that was made with HAP, which was an absolute privatisation of the housing service. And then we bring in all the other little schemes that make sure we keep the prices so high that we think it's normal when the central bank change their rules to make it more flexible for somebody to buy a house, get a mortgage of 4 times their salary. What kind of a civilised society thinks that's civilised? More flexible rules. Now, the inflexibility of the central bank going back was the justification for the Help to Buy scheme. And I've read into the record what Mazars, which is the 4th report analysing that, saying it's utterly terrible. I'm paraphrasing it, but don't get rid of it now. It would be too much of a jolt to the market and too much a jolt to the expectations that we will continue to help people to buy houses up to 500,000. At 4 times more the cost of the scheme than was ever envisaged by the Department of Finance. And you want us to have faith in you in relation to this. I certainly welcome this piece of legislation, although I'm at a loss to know the cut-off point, although I understand it from a legal point of view. But what do you do with all of the people that have got notices to quit that are overholding before this legislation? Do we just look on them as, what's it called, just dead weight, or what is the rationale for that, Minister? You might try and explain that to me, because I'll go a long way with you in understanding legislation. But what is this cut-off point, and what about those people who are already overholding? What will happen to them? There is no emergency accommodation available in Galway City, as I understand it. There are very few houses for rent. The houses that are there don't come under any of the schemes that we have. And yet we're persisting with that and putting money into the market. Now, I know that we can't get rid of these schemes overnight. I certainly don't agree with Mazars that it will take another 2 years to get rid of the Help to Buy scheme. But what we do need is a fundamental recognition that we allowed this to happen, government after government, based on government policy that said the market will provide, the market that is driven by greed and profit, and off with them. I'm not here to judge them on a moral basis. I am here as somebody in the legislature that says there is a different way and it needs to be regulated and controlled. And I'll finish again by talking about Galway. We have a port in Galway that owns land that's doing their own thing. We have Kent Station with 14 acres of land in the middle of the city doing their own thing. We have Sandy Road, Moorland and Headford. And we're being told repeatedly by the narrative that these are all marvellous plans, and we've drawn in architects, 9 or 10, I think, in relation to Sandy Road to give us their vision. When we know the vision is public housing on public land, indistinguishable from other houses, and stop this hypocrisy and division, and let people who want to rent for life rent for life, and those that want to buy, let them get a mortgage, but not at 4 times their salary. So I welcome the legislation in the limited way that I have outlined. Garamagat.